Welcome, friends, family, patriots, believers, conservatives alike. Welcome to The Grid, your intersection of faith, politics, and commerce. Okay, Shaun, so we're discussing four Supreme Court cases today. Did I hold up five? Four Supreme Court cases today. This by far is the one that got me the most excited. And I was a little bit nerdy about, I think, as you and I discussed on the pre-show. This is the one Supreme Court got right. And I can't believe that they got the social media one so wrong, and then they got this one so right.
It's like baseball, It's like we've got what was his name? Played for Boston way back in the day before either one of us was born. Babe Ruth. Yeah. I mean, swinging for the fences.
You just offended a lot of people. No, he
Well,
was not. He wasn't Boston.
It wasn't Boston?
Well, he left Boston, the curse of the Bambino. No, he was a Yankee.
He was a Yankee.
Yankee or Dodger, Yankee.
You would think I'd know that growing up in New England, but so anyway, my point is Babe Ruth was always swinging for the fences. And so he had the most home runs, but I think he also had the most strikeouts. So I know, that's why it's not good for me to use sports analogies.
It is true. But it is, I do like it. Swing's they got a strikeout on the social media, got a home run on this one. So Shaun, what is the Chevron doctrine? Can I dive into that a little bit?
Well, I didn't know that it was actually named after the Chevron case. And in that case, it was a gas producer.
Yeah, so it's fascinating to me, and it's going to be hard not to go down all the rabbit trails. But in essence, what the Chevron doctrine said was the court, I want to say it was 40 or 50 years ago. It was quite some time ago.
40. Mm-hmm.
Was a 40. The Supreme Court took the approach that if a federal agency implement a regulation that wasn't specifically stated in the law, so maybe that agency took a little bit of maybe a liberal interpretation of what Congress meant, as long as it was reasonable and made sense, in essence, the courts had no jurisdiction to challenge that. It completely deferred the independent decision-making back to the federal agency, which has already been a problem, Shaun. Actually, I am going to digress a little bit because we've talked about this on the show before about how laws are written so broadly in our country, but it's the regulations that really are the meat. They're what really you have to live and die by. The law is nothing more than really principle based, and then the regulatory agencies take that law and they say, okay, what are the regulations that we pass in order to make sure that law is implemented as intended? The problem is those regulatory agencies are biased. They're part of the deep state. And I can tell you, the ones that really come to mind are the IRS, but probably most notably the EPA. The EPA is a huge one. And what the EPA has done is Congress will say, we want to, the EPA has the right to regulate pollutants. This is a perfect example. And so that makes sense. The EPA is going to make sure that nuclear power plants are not dumping waste into the water, right? So clean water, clean air, and regulate pollutants. Well, then the EPA writes a regulation that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, even though it's naturally occurring. And then the EPA jumps in and says, we have the right to regulate anything that produces carbon dioxide. So that's cars, that's trees. The EPA has the right to regulate wetlands. So that's the Congress says, well, wetlands or something maybe comes under the EPA's jurisdiction. Well, the EPA then writes a regulation that says a wetland is any place that holds a body of water for more than 12 hours or something like that. Literally a puddle in your backyard could be classified as a wetland by the EPA if they determined they wanted to make an example out of you. So it's really the regulatory agencies have so much power and authority that really has gone unchallenged for the better part of 40 years. It's just, and honestly, when this first came about, it was actually conservatives thought that was a good thing because, and I can't remember the reason why, but in that particular Chevron case, it actually favored a more conservative point of view, but it's been used now to allow the government to just have massive bloat and pretty much rewrite anything at once that Congress produces. But more importantly, the court basically said, we don't even ourselves don't even have the right to review this because That's the agency's job. Well, why does that all that matter? Because in the Chevron case, the Supreme Court just changed that. The Chevron doctrine is as dead as Roe v. Wade now. It's gone. Actually, it's more dead because it hasn't been remanded to the states. It's done. The Supreme Court basically took the approach that not only is that incorrect, we actually have a duty as an independent branch of government that if we think a regulatory agency, even if it looks like they've reasonably done what they did, it doesn't matter if it's reasonable if we don't think that that was Congress's intent, and therefore the regulatory agency has stepped out of bounds or done something that appears to be unconstitutional. We have the right and the duty to look at that and review that in court. Absolutely the right decision, Shaun. So Shaun, I'm sorry, I totally went off and ran with that. I think the Supreme Court got a home run on this one. What say you?
Well, I think that I every part of what you just said nailed it. The thing that gets me is like, and it lines up with that is, look, we can't, when it comes to contracts and things of that nature, you can't put something in the contract that violates the Constitution. You can't put something in any kind of agreement or deal with a company or with a client where anything violates the Constitution. You can't stifle free speech. My rights don't end because I walked into your building.
Yeah, that is so true. And it'll be interesting to see. So of all the cases we've discussed today, the abortion case, I think, in Idaho is not that big a deal because I think the occurrence of that situation is going to be so limited. The January 6th protest case is definitely going to have some impact on those protesters who are currently under prosecution. The social media is going to have a big negative impact, but it already has had a negative impact. So it's not going to be a change from where we are right now. This particular case, the Chevron Doctrine, I think the future of this is significant. And I think it's going to take weeks and months and years for some of the regulatory agencies' power to be unwound. But I think the future looks bright in light of this case and the authority of the regulatory, the fourth branch of government, the regulatory agencies.
Well, I agree with Justice Ketanji Brown that there probably will be a flood of cases because these agencies have ruled the wrong way. You know, what Scripture tells us that when the wicked are in power, it's a mess. The people suffer. Where the righteous are in power, there's peace. And so, yeah, I agree with her. There are going to be a lot of lawsuits because these agencies have tried to pull fast ones, and they are draconian or tyrannical. Like you said, claiming that a mud puddle that shows up only when it rains is a wetland. Come on. They need their butts whipped. And that's see, when Congress abstained from doing their job and they just did general brushstrokes, that would be great if the agencies were run by the righteous. The problem is they're run by ideologists with an agenda, and that agenda is not righteous.
I'll give you another example, Shaun, because you're spot on. Another example where we can see this is the Civil Rights Act that was passed by Congress, where it says that no one can be discriminated on based on race, religion, sex, and so forth. And the federal government is taking the approach that sex means how you identify, pronouns, transgender, LGBTQIA+, the whole gamut. And that's clearly not the case because those conversations weren't even happening when the Civil Rights Act was passed. But the regulatory agencies that implement that have taken that approach. The executive branch has taken that approach, that's exactly what Congress meant when it's not true. And so Congress needs to address that and bring clarity to that. But to me, in light of this case, that's another example of one that the Supreme Court can say, you just don't have the right to do that. You don't have the right to make that assumption. It's not a reasonable assumption.
Right. And the court is being accused of being right wing and all this, and oh my gosh, they're trying to destroy our democracy. No, what's being destroyed is a wicked agenda that is trying to remake America into something she was never supposed to be. Their idea is freedom. Their definition of freedom is the freedom to sin. The
Yeah.
definition of freedom by our forefathers was the freedom to follow our conscience.
You know,
And there's a big difference.
that's probably a whole nother podcast, but you're talking about, in many ways, we have different definitions of the same word. Conservatives and liberals have different definitions of freedom. I listened to a podcast this week that I thought was so interesting that talked about that the liberal pundits who are talking about that Trump is going to destroy democracy, they don't have the same definition of democracy that we do. Number one, we're not a democracy. Sorry to break it to you, audience. We are a republic. We're a representative republic. We elect people to represent us in Congress. A true democracy of 330 million people would be absolute chaos. But I digress. So when I think of freedom and I think of democracy, I think of the ability to freely elect those who would represent us and represent our point of views consistent with the Constitution at the federal level. When the progressive liberal says democracy threatened, they are talking about the very thing we're talking about here is these regulatory agencies losing their power to do their bidding. That's what they call the loss of freedom and the destruction of democracy. And by that definition, I say destroy it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So when they talk about, Trump is going to destroy, he's going to destroy he and we are going to destroy their agenda. But the country and our constitutional republic will remain.
It'll
And
be
that's the whole
stronger.
point.
Actually, it'll be stronger.
Yeah, because we get rid of all the stuff that is literally causing our country to crumble. All you have to do is look at the cities that are coming apart at the seams, and guess who's in charge of them? Every one of the cities that we've got that are crumbling before our eyes, they're all run by the same cartel.
They are. There's no
But I
doubt. Well,
digress.
Shaun, number one, I hope this was helpful to you, the audience. I get a little bit nerdy about these court cases because I enjoy reading them. I enjoy hearing the thought process, or in many cases, on our liberal justices, the lack of thought processes of how they come to their conclusions. It's fascinating to me. And maybe because the rule of law is important, our country is founded on laws, it's founded on our Constitution. These things are important. This is why who you elect as president. There may be no other important. There may be no other reason that's more important than the president than the fact that they appoint justices to the Supreme Court. And I think you're seeing that right here. Shaun, any closing thoughts after we discuss these four cases today?
Well, as usual with the Supreme Court, we have a mixed bag, but I think overall, we've got a general win when it comes to these four cases, and we've got the biggest one coming up next week as relates to when this podcast is being recorded. So next week is whether or not the President of the United States, what's that term that they're looking to do? Has immunity.
Has immunity,
And
executive immunity.
He should, because hear me loud and clear, my Democrat friends and family. If the president doesn't have immunity, then Biden and Clinton and Obama can be investigated down to their friggin' DNA.
Which we don't want that. I don't want presidents and prior presidents being prosecuted.
No, there's stuff I don't agree with them about, but guess what? They have to talk about issues in their entirety. They need to know where the boundaries of the law are so that they can know how far they can go and what they need to avoid. And so sometimes they're going to ask, is this legal? Is there a version of this that is legal? And under what under the things that are taking place right now, under the kind of investigations that they're doing, they're basically turning those innocent conversations where they're just seeking information and to understand what the boundaries are, they're going to turn those into criminal offenses.
That's right.
And that is ridiculous. I don't agree with Obama about a lot of stuff, but he needs to be protected. And if, you know, if there's something really big that he did that meets or exceeds Watergate, we have ways to deal with that already.
We do. Shaun, it was great to visit with you today. Like you said, I think the Supreme Court mostly got these cases right, with the exception of the social media case. I think the court's been moving in the right direction. I think the fact that we've got a majority of folks on there that are interpreting it according to the Constitution is a win in of itself. And we can't afford to put someone in the White House that is going to start putting more Sonia Sotomayor's on the court. That would be disastrous.
Exactly. You've been listening to The Grid, the intersection of faith, politics, and commerce. Till next time.
Till next time.